We are here with part 2 of our delve into what makes Halloween Horror Nights the standout scare event it is. This is episode 477 of the Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. Welcome back, everyone. Before we get started in this episode, if you haven't listened to part 1 of this series, then please go and do so before listening to this one. It is episode 475 of the Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. Now, before we get into the meat of this show, let me refresh your memories of who my 7 guests are.
Hey, this is Harry from Freaks of Halloween Horror Nights.
Hi, I'm Kenneth. I am one of the co-hosts of the Rush of Fear podcast.
Hi, my name is Hunter Fagan. I am the current lead host of the Catacombs of Halloween Horror Nights over on the 2.0 version of that.
Hi guys, I'm Maddie from the Rush of Fear podcast.
Hi everybody, my name is Johnny Bronto. I run HauntScene.com out of Orlando, Florida.
Hello everybody, I am Michelle from Muggle Travel Company and the Rush of Fear podcast.
Hello, my name is Sean. I live in Central Florida, and I'm part of the team that runs the HNNightmares account.
Now you've had your memories refreshed of my guests, let's get into it. So you heard on the first episode my guest's history with the event. It's now time to take a look at the event itself a little bit. Halloween Horror Nights in Orlando has grown in popularity since its humble beginning back in 1991 and has become the scare attraction to visit, winning the Golden Ticket Award 12 times for the best Halloween event in the world. So the next question I picked my guests' brains with was, as Halloween Horror Nights wins many awards as the best Halloween event, what is it about HHN that makes it stand out above every other haunt?
That is a tough one. I would say for myself, it's just the way they put the whole thing together. Like, it's just they transform an entire park into something, and everything kind of correlates with whatever's going on that year, like the theming. And it just they just got me hooked. I don't know. I can't explain it. It's just something that it's like I have to do no matter what I'm doing. Is that every year I plan that. Like, everybody knows wherever I work, October is my thing, and I'm going to Horror Nights. They automatically know that. I think for a general population, I think it's the IPs. Like when somebody sees Stranger Things or something like that, and that's what's drawing the crowds. And that's what they have to continue to do to like pump the crowds in there. Like this year, I think is different only because last year with COVID and everything, and there really wasn't an event. So many people and so many nights have already been sold out. It's crazy. And I love to see that. Don't get me wrong. I like to see the sellouts because it's an event and the passion that I have. So I like to see that a lot of people are sharing the same passion that I have. I'll never not go to an event. It doesn't matter. I'll be like 75 in a walker or whatever, and I'll still be going. So, I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm going to make it there every year. So it's just whatever they do, like they put everything together right. Like they do it 100%, and they don't spare no expense to get things done to make it that event that you want to go to and come to. And, which is amazing and every year it's different, which is great. So, they really don't replay anything, and they just keep it rolling just like that. And because even if you think like Cary, Ohio, like who ever heard of Cary, Ohio before really Horror Nights? I didn't know anything about Cary, Ohio. And then they bring it to the HHN, and they blew it up so much that now everybody wants to go to Cary, Ohio and visit. It's like little things like that, the little things they bring to it. And then they keep it going throughout the years. There's always some way they connect like every year to something. And they bring things the fans want to see.
To me, I think it's the level of budget that Universal is able to provide the event and the scale at which they do it. It's definitely, I've been to some smaller haunts and they're really fun. It's really great to see how innovative and creative people can be on a limited budget. And I definitely appreciate all of that, but nothing ever feels as much like as monumentous as Halloween Horror Nights, just because it does take over an entire theme park. It takes over most of that park. There's a few dead zones sometimes where like there's not really anything Halloween Horror Nights related specifically happening, but it's just so big and they put so much into it and they don't phone it in. You know, it's always treated with the same level of care. And you have the IPs, which are a somewhat recent thing in terms of the history of Halloween Horror Nights, of how prominent the IPs are, but is a necessary thing of like how and why Universal keeps winning this, and being able to transport people into movies and TV shows that you've seen, and to do it so convincingly and so authentically. No one else is doing that. No one else in the world is putting you into classic and modern horror movies and shows in a way that feels so real and accurate. Like, this is actually Stranger Things. This is not some off-brand, you know, dollar store version of Stranger Things. Like, oh yeah, you know, instead of the alphabet, they put the numbers up on the thing and you can tell what they're going for. No, like this, we're really there. This is the real thing. And the IPs are there to get you in the door, right? If you've never been to Halloween Horror Nights, my sister, American Horror Story got her in the door. A lot of people, Stranger Things got them in the door. That's what sells the tickets. And you go and you see it and you're like, wow, they nailed this. And then you're like, well, let's see what else they do. You go into an original and you're like, this is a very complete thing that they've done here. And I didn't know what this was before, but I just experienced a full story. And maybe I didn't understand beat for beat what was happening, but I definitely had a very complete experience of something that never existed before. And I don't know what it was. And I want to see what else they can do. You know, like that is kind of, I think, how it goes a lot of the time. And to me, it's the budget, the scale, the care, and the high profile partners that they are able to do, and then put all of those first three things back into that and give guests a really one of a kind, unique experience that is above what anyone else in the world is able to give you.
I mean, it's for sure just the sense of detail and care that goes into the event. Universal, of course, has the space to do as many haunted houses as they do. They have the budget to do the streets in the way that they do. And then they also have the budget just to expand out these haunted houses. Like, I think I read recently, or at least not that long ago, that each haunted house has the budget of something like $1 million, which is pretty, crazy, but it shows in every single element. And it's, I mean, they recoup that over like the first 2 weekends, right? And like drinks and food purchases and merch and everything like that. And you know what? That might not be entire. I mean, maybe some of them are like $750 or whatever it might be. But, the fact that they just have the money to put into this thing, capitalized on top of just the long legacy of HHN and how people have gone for an extremely long time. And what's interesting is 30 years is, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary. It's kind of the 31st year of the event. I guess you could even say it's the 30th year of HHN in a way, right? When you counter in Fright Nights and everything like that. But I guess the key thing is, it's such a relatively brand new thing in the grand scope of theme parks. And what I mean by that is you can go on YouTube right now and you can find camcorder footage of something like HHN 4 and what those scare zones looked like, and a couple of like some footage of the haunted houses, and all the commercials are on YouTube. You can go watch them. And it's one of those things where its history has been so documented over time. And it's awesome to have an event that has the legacy that it does, but is always continuously evolving. And I feel like that's a huge thing that enough people recognize, but maybe is not discussed enough about, is that HHN has continued to stay relevant by just adapting to current media trends. There's always the conversation about IP integration to HHN. Oh, it's just the corporate tie-in, it's whatever it might be. But the very first house, even Dungeon of Terror, that is going back to a heavy focus on the Universal monsters and some of those characters in there. And even then, like before I love that Universal makes such a big stink. Like during HHN 24, they're like the first debut of Michael Myers. And it's like, y'all have been shoving Michael Myers into zones and houses unofficially for 12 to 13 years at that point. But I guess my point being is just they've seen, okay, people love haunted houses. They always love an IP integration. We've gone from the heavy original focus to the icon years with the next decade into the IP years. And they just continue to adapt and do new things that have managed to keep them to stay not only relevant, but exceeding beyond where I think any of the other haunts are. It might objectively not be the best haunt as far as like detail. It might not objectively be the best haunt as far as like scares. It might not objectively be the best haunt as far as such and such and such and such. But as far as a singular entity, I think everybody agrees there's nobody else doing it on this scale, unlike Halloween Horror Nights in Orlando. To my last comment on this question is the scare actors that work Halloween Horror Nights in particular are pretty much all not only theme park fans, but they are diehard HHN fans who understand their role and their legacy is going to go down for literally hundreds of thousands of people for the rest of their lives. That one interaction is going to be the one dude who he's only going to one HHN night this year, but that interaction he has with the Ice Cream Man in Vamp 55 is something he's going to talk about every single Halloween for the next 20 to 30 years, Like
I said before, I do think that the financial situation of Universal does definitely help make this event a lot more grand than others. Now, other haunts do amazing things. Like, I've never been to Hallowscream, but I've seen pictures, I've seen videos, I've heard my friends talk about it. And like, they do incredible things. They have incredible like original ideas, but like once again, I really think what makes HHN stand out is the fan community. Like I haven't heard of any other haunt have the community around it that Halloween Horror Nights does, and more specifically Halloween Horror Nights Orlando. Like I maybe Orlando people are just like a little bit more crazy than other people. I'm not totally sure, but like I feel like anytime I wear like a Halloween Horror Nights shirt out, whether it's to like the grocery store or like to Universal itself as a guest for a day, like people will always comment on it. Like I was wearing my one of my friends found a HHN 15 shirt at the thrift store and gave it to me, and obviously I did not go to Halloween Horror Nights 15, but I'm like so happy to have this shirt. And I was in Publix not too long ago wearing it because I was like, I need to go for like a carton of milk and that is it. I do not care what I'm wearing. And I had a person come up to me like, oh, 15 was great. Did you go through that house? And I was like, oh my God, we're insane. Like, but like, I'm sure I could be anywhere in the world wearing a Halloween Horror Nights shirt, and at least one person is going to be like, oh, Halloween Horror Nights. I'm going to be like, I'm literally in like Iceland, but yeah, Halloween Horror Nights. Let's talk about it. So I really think that the community is what makes HHN stand out. Because like if there was no community and if people didn't enjoy going as much as they would, I'm sure we would not have the event that we have nowadays. Like I feel like every year they're trying, like creative is trying to better themselves and, make this year better than last year because of us. They're like, okay, so last year they really, really liked this. And in the past, they've also really, really liked this. Let's like put those two things together and create this totally awesome new thing because they really like all of this. And, we really like doing it. And we're trying to make each year better. And because of us, because like, there's Halloween Horror Nights Facebook groups and like there's Halloween Horror Nights podcasts and there's Halloween Horror Nights like meetup events and everything. I don't I don't see a Hallow Scream one. I don't see a Dark Horizons one. Like, it's not, but like at the same time, like, why isn't there? Like, what is it about Horror Nights specifically? Like, a haunted house is a haunted house. You're going to walk through, you're going to get scared no matter what. But is it our history? Is it our storylines? Is it our characters? Is it our, like, obviously, like I said, like, money does play a huge part in it. Like, Universal has money to spend. We freaking had Robosaurus. Like, what, if we want something, we're most likely going to get it. As far as like licensing goes, like, that is obviously going to be a bit harder. But like, if we want giant fishmen on stilts, we're going to get giant fishmen on stilts. Like, it's for a Dark Horizons, that's obviously going to be a lot harder. They're going to try their best to make it look the best it is, but it's probably going to be like a plastic fish head on some wooden stilts. Like, there's that huge financial difference, unfortunately, between Halloween Horror Nights and other events. Doesn't mean that other events are not as good and that they don't do the same thing as us, but like, I think we just have that little bit of a higher ground with like where our event is and, that kind of thing. And we're lucky, but we also have a creative team that is the best in the world, and they have these ridiculous ideas that turn into these fantastic houses that people will talk about forever. Like, Jack the Clown was just an idea, and now he's like the biggest theme park icon next to probably Mickey Mouse, which is so weird to think about, but yeah.
I think what makes Halloween Horror Nights stand out and win all these awards is just the sheer passion and the creativity. Universal could very well just take in a formula and just pump out the same thing every year, but the event is constantly evolving, getting bigger, adding different things, and really Universal does a good job about having something for everybody. And because they have an entire playground, an entire park to work with, that's not something that a lot of other places can compete with. So I think that passion, that creativity, that wanting, that understanding that part of that formula is to grow and evolve every year, I think that is what Universal does. That is the best. I don't foresee Universal ever taking a year off or resting on their laurels if they can help it. And I think that's one of the reasons why. It's just it evolves. They get new people in every once in a while, but they all have that same passion for the really true fans of the event that not only follow the event itself, but follow the people of the event. It gives you something to connect to, because a Mike Aiello or a Patrick Braillard or whoever, they tend to be a little bit more accessible. Like, they're human beings that you can root for. And I know that it takes a village, and there are thousands and thousands of people that make Halloween Horror Nights happen, but it is really nice when you can see those figureheads and you have access to them. And that's why Halloween Horror Nights it wins all these awards.
So I haven't really been to a ton of other haunts, I would, around the world, although that would be amazing. Bucket list for sure, writing it down right now. But locally, especially once Halloween Horror Nights shut down last year, locally, there's some good things. Like the haunt nearby where I live, they're allowed to touch you, which is crazy. Didn't like that so much. But just the quality, the consistency with the quality of the event at HHN, the scare actors have to do things a certain way, a certain caliber. They the set pieces are world class. I mean, some of these things, it feels like you're walking straight through the movie. I mean, I'm a huge Stranger Things fan. And walking through those two houses was like, it brought tears to my eyes almost. I felt like I was in the movie, and it was so incredible. And you can't get that definitely at little local haunts. They just don't have the budget to do that, obviously. And they don't have the money to pay to have rights to IPs and things like that, but they just don't have the money basically to do things of the caliber that Halloween Horror Nights does. It's just so beautiful, from the attention to detail, not just in the houses, but in the scare zones as well. They just go all out with the shows, with the talent that they bring in, with now with the Lagoon show, and the money that they've invested in that is incredible. You just can't find that anywhere else. I will happily look and compare and go and visit other places just to see if they can do it like Universal, but I really doubt they can.
I think it's the scale of Horror Nights in particular. It is so massive. And the houses in particular, I think you can only get houses that big and different every year when you have someone like Universal, who's got that movie studio budget, as well as the resources to make like film quality sets that are there, for basically just like a couple months. And then they're torn down, and then new ones are built, the following year. And I love that when you enter like a sound stage, which is also a whole beast in itself, you never know what you're going to see. You could walk in there and there might be a huge castle with a wicked witch flying above you. It could be a sunken riverboat with some bushman trying to get you, or it could be like a spaceship. You never fully know. And each house is like a work of art that's been built to last for years, but ultimately goes away when the event closes, a month later, and only to be replaced by something completely different, but just as grand. And I wish there was a way we could like preserve these and put them somewhere. But I mean, I would like a museum of facades. I would love just to go from like the castle to the ship, work my way through. I would love that. But yeah, for me, the reason I think people love it so much is, even if you're like me and don't get scared, just the scale, it is almost impossible to go to Horror Nights, especially for your first time, and not have a moment where you just kind of stand there and go like, wow, that is impressive. And I've done houses elsewhere. They have, some of them have great, sets and beautiful facades, but I think Universal having the sound stages, which are built for things like movie sets, they can have, a lot more control with lighting and temperature. I remember, they've had a few houses now, like The Thing or like Winter's Night back in the day, where the snow is falling, and the second you walk in there, the temperature drops like 20 degrees and it's freezing and the snow is falling. And, if it's like Body Collectors, you got the thunder flashing, and, and it really puts you in that place and time. But it also goes to my, the thing where I said, the facades, like, who else is going to build like a 3-story Victorian, which is just an entrance to a tent in reality?
Now, I agree with many of those comments. Having an entire theme park that was built with sound stages as part of it definitely helps Universal elevate Halloween Horror Nights to the standing that it is. And of course, budget and sway also makes an impact. Being able to do deals with studios to bring in some of the most iconic and new horror franchises helps make it something special. But I think a huge shout out needs to go to the creative team, because without them, you've got no event. They live and breathe Halloween Horror Nights, and it shows. But we also need to pay respect to the scare actors, the tour guides, the ops team, and every single team member that comes together to make Halloween Horror Nights special. The people serving food and beverage, to the custodians, to everybody behind the scenes, and even those people waving you through the houses. They're all doing their job, and they all add to making Halloween Horror Nights what it is. But also, the guests. The guests play a massive part of Halloween Horror Nights. The community, the Halloween Horror Nights community is huge and is such a welcoming group of people, and make the event the special thing that it is.
Have you taken a stroll down Diagon Alley and visited Gringotts Bank? Taken a ride through New York with Jimmy Fallon? Visited the Truffalo Trees in Seuss Landing, or hung out with a real-life Transformer? No? Then what are you waiting for? At Universal Orlando Resort, there truly is an option for everyone. Or if you're leaning a little more towards pixie dust rather than wands and potions, Disney destinations around the globe await your arrival. No matter the adventure, our sponsors have you covered. Be sure to let the experts at Mouse and Muggle Travel Company take care of all your travel needs, earning the distinction of being an earmarked agency specializing in Disney destinations, as well as becoming one of the first to be named a You Preferred agency with Universal Parks and Resorts Vacations. Mouse and Muggle Travel Company will ensure you receive top-rated customer service. Just visit mouseandmuggle.com to fill out a no-obligation quote request, or send your request to info@mouseandmuggle.com. Their team can take care of you no matter where in the world you want to go. With a flick of their wand and a little bit of pixie dust, the process will be so seamless, some might even say it's simply magical.
So, now we know why it's so highly regarded. Now, a theme park can't rest on its laurels, and Universal never does. And the same goes for Halloween Horror Nights. So the next question I ask my guests, as this is the 30th official year of the event, what do you think Universal Orlando need to do to improve the event, to consistently upgrade it, to keep it at the top of its game?
That's tough. I mean, but personally, I don't think they really need to do anything. I think they're right on track with what they're doing. They just keep doing what they're doing, and people are coming, and we're getting new generations in here, which is amazing too, seeing all the kids and stuff like that. I know some people were talking about a kid-friendly event and stuff like that a couple of years ago, but it's not the case. It's, we're passing it on like this, again, I don't really think they have to do much of anything. Just keep staying up to date with the IPs that they bring and mix it in with the originals, so we can give the new generation the backstories of the icons, and everybody can follow along and just enjoy it like we have over the last 23 years. This fun fact, Mike, this is my middle son's first year ever going, and he just turned 16 last Monday. The first night he was like, whatever. The second night, and now like he's gone 4 times this year, and he loves it. He loves all of it. But he actually went. We were staying on property last Friday night, and he actually went over on his shuttle by himself and hung out there by himself for like 2 or 3 hours. So yeah, it's crazy. His favorite house is icons. He loves icons, and believe it or not, so that's what we want. We want to be able to pass that passion on to our children. And when one of them takes an acceptance to it and just wants to latch on to it, I mean, I was happy. I was like a proud dad. I have 3 boys, and he's like the only one that actually enjoys going. So yeah. I mean, the tribute store is a thing of its own. I mean, like last year was so awesome with the Beetlejuice room and everything else. And then the food inside the tribute store is a whole nother thing. And then just even the merchandise, like the merchandise has become so like amazing that you want to buy it all. I mean, it's just beyond anything. And they've expanded it so much than just like a house shirt and a couple of the t-shirts. Now there's a shirt for everything, like the scare zones. And now they come with the little vinyl figures and the mystery pins. And it's fun seeing everybody trying to collect everything.
I think one thing, one obviously is to just keep the quality up. I think that's number one. To keep the event at the same level of quality or better year after year. You can't just start kind of cutting corners and doing things cheaper or easier than you used to, because people will notice that. On top of that, I think trying to innovate ways to deliver scares, places to put characters. I think the repository in 2016 was a really interesting experiment that I would really be interested in seeing them try something like that again. It was a little bit confusing. Like, I didn't really understand what the marketing on that was not great. Everyone kept calling it the VR house, and that does not at all describe what it was. It was like a 3-act interactive experience, the second act of which did use VR as the main delivery system. But I would say that was probably the least interesting part of the entire experience. And having done it now one time, if they were to bring something like that back and they were able to improve on the VR element of it, but also do a better job of preparing people for the non-VR aspects of it, which are the main sections, I would say. There's like a beginning part where it was kind of like an escape room with live actors interacting with you in each room. So that because you were on a strict timer, and you had to do X thing in this room in 2 minutes. And I don't think we completed any of our tasks, but the actor was in there to be like, all right, if they run out of time, just let them through to the next room. And we have like a story beat for you to do that in case they don't make it. And if they do make it, then you have another script to follow, you know? But it was very stressful, very cool. They could touch you and grab you. You signed a thing. I got grabbed by my shirt and like pulled across the room. It was very, very cool. And I think that experiences like that, more intimate, more extreme, and I mean, it's obviously this year wouldn't be the year to do it with COVID, but a more intimate, interactive experience like that, that gives you a more intense experience than what the haunted house can give you, because they're just trying to push people through. You know, we got to get all these people through this house. And that might, you know, that means that not everyone will get the best experience walking through here, but we just got to get everybody through. And then the repository was the opposite of that, where it's like, there's 4 people walking through this thing together, and these 4 people get the entire experience, and every group gets the entire experience. And it was really unique and interesting. And I walked out of it saying, I don't know if I loved that, but I like what they were trying to do. And I would like them to continue trying to master this. And they haven't. But I think things like that, on top of keeping the rest of the event increasing in quality, increasing in the amount of, I don't know, but the amount, the level of experience that they have been giving, just keep that. The bar has been going up for 30 years, you know? So if that bar keeps going up and they start trying to innovate in other types of experiences that you can have, I think that they'll stay on top. And the tribute store is another part of that. You know, the tribute store is something that I think was just started as like it would be cool if we had a store that's kind of like a museum to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the event. We'll make like a museum that's also a store. And now it's not really a tribute to the event anymore. Now the tribute store is an attraction that is part of the event. And it's just an attraction at Universal Studios Florida. It's not even just Halloween Horror Nights. It's holidays, it's Jurassic World, it's Mardi Gras. So these kinds of things, I feel like Universal keeps like stumbling into like things that they're like, well, let's try this. And then everyone's like, this is amazing. And they're like, oh, okay, well, let's see how we can make this better. And we've seen over the past 5 years, the tribute store go from like, let's see if people like this. Oh yeah, they really like this. Okay, eventually this will just be a destination unto itself. And the food, I think, is kind of like that too, where like this year, Mardi Gras was more of a food festival out of necessity, just because there couldn't be a parade. There couldn't be concerts. So they said, okay, well then let's focus on the food. And man, that really worked. And that has continued through the summer, and now it clearly is going to be a big part of Halloween Horror Nights. And yeah, I feel like Universal just keeps accidentally finding these gold mines of like, oh, this is something that wasn't here. And nobody necessarily was missing it before, but now that they've experienced it, it's like, oh, this is really, really great. And we should focus on how we can make this even better. And these IP branded food booths in Horror Nights is like a stroke of genius that I never would have thought of, you know, like to have the barbecue restaurant from Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a food booth. You can go get barbecue from the place and like be eating people, I guess, kind of. Like, it's genius. And I feel like I've already seen people like looking at the ones that are less IP related, and it's just like gray bricks, and they're like, what IP is this? Which one uses gray bricks? And I'm like, guys, there were never IP themed food booths before. And now we're like nitpicking the ones that aren't IP based. It's like, no, like the IP ones are like, it's not even icing on top of the cake. It's like they put an entire second cake on top of an already amazing cake. And like the ones that are not IP branded are just that first cake. And then you know, it's great. And it gives, you know, Universal's executive chefs and their menu designers even more opportunity to like be creative and come up with something. You know, find the next butterbeer, but you own it. It's all yours. So you don't have to give any of that money to anybody else, you know? Like
I think the key thing is going to be not only utilizing things that people are excited for, like, you know, the Netflix partnership has been documented extremely well and has been very, very successful for HHN. It's going to be a combination of continuing to do what they've always done with partnerships with IPs and everything like that. But I also think we're heading back into the years of HHN more than anything being its own brand. I think that Halloween Horror Nights now carries a bigger... Halloween Horror Nights by itself carries a bigger name than Netflix at Halloween Horror Nights, if that makes sense. I think it's going to be an element of continuing to embrace the originals, which have shown great success. I mean, everybody this year, 3 houses are alternating this year after opening weekend between those top 3 spots, and that is Case Files, that is Icons, and that is Wicked Growth. Those are the houses we're pretty consistently seeing at the top of people's lists, and those are all original houses. Icons is an in-house developed brand which has the recognizability of IPs for certain people. And it's going to be, I think, more than anything, continue to have representation of major things that people are excited for, but focusing back on HHN as a whole, you don't need to build it up to become more popular anymore. It skyrocketed with The Walking Dead. It reached another pedestal with American Horror Story, another level with Stranger Things, and now with HHN 30, I think we're seeing the tide start to shift a little bit where Halloween Horror Nights is its thing, and that's all it needs to be. Another thing that they're doing that's very smart too is they're doing these IP houses that are done in an original way, and I think like that's a huge part of it as well, because you're appealing to both audiences now instead of just being a straight up adaptation of an American Horror Story or The Exorcist or something like that. You're spinning things, and we kind of saw that happen with Poltergeist. I feel kind of was like the turning point, and then you are still getting those literal translations with like your Stranger Things and things, but I would say even Haunting of Hill House is, it was always going to be a little bit of a stretch to adapt that just as far as like a normal series into what it is, but taking that and changing things to being an original execution using IP characters, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds for your entire audience. And we're actually even seeing that with Texas Chainsaw this year too. It's back for the 3rd time, so spinning it a little bit was great.
I mean, as far as improving, like, obviously what we've been doing now for 30 years is definitely working. Multiple houses, multiple scare zones, 1 to 2 shows, different food each year, like different stories, things like that. So I think like as far as improving the actual like structure of the event, I think they're doing great. 10 houses is a lot. It's enough to keep people there from open to close. I don't even know where they would put like any more houses. We don't have any more sound stations. I think what they're doing is great. Like, I think I'm not a video game person, but from what I've heard, there's a lot of horror video games that I think could definitely be great in the event. So getting some other types of like IPs in there, not just movies and TV shows, even though, we're always going to have horror movies and TV shows. Like I just started watching Fear Street yesterday. Great. First of all, I think it'd be a fantastic addition to the Horror Nights lineup. Yeah, I don't know. I think just keeping the balance between originals and IPs is probably the biggest thing that, because like you don't want to have, in my personal opinion, I don't think they should have more IPs than originals and vice versa. I think that like the set 5-5 is great. Because like we always want to see the original ideas that creative brings to us because they rarely fail. Like they're pretty great. They're pretty great. But it's also, like I said earlier, it's so fun to be able to walk through, like as a fan of Stranger Things, like it was amazing to be able to walk through basically that film set while also getting scared. Like it's for me, that's like the perfect marriage of like IP horror. Like, so fun. I think it's good to have some IPs, but I personally don't think there should ever be like, I mean, I know that there has been, but like, I think if it gets to the point where it's like 10 houses, 2 originals, 8 IPs, that's when I would be like, okay, let's get back to creating our own like original horror content, because that's the stuff. When I listen to other people talk about Halloween Horror Nights, like, I feel as though it's always the original houses that come up more than the IPs, which like the IPs are fantastic. Like American Horror Story was great, but like I think that to keep the fans like happy and not, I mean like fan service, but at the same time, like, I don't know. I don't think there should ever be more, like way more IPs than there are. Because like Disney's doing it right now too. Like they're changing these rides. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Guardians of the Galaxy, but like, why did we have to get rid of Ellen? That was such a fun original ride. So I just think keeping that balance and always with the originals, like always trying to make them as unique as possible would definitely be how they keep Horror Nights at the top. Although I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think like Mythos, it's going to be that #1 theme park restaurant for, 25 years. How long have I been alive? I feel like Mythos has been #1 theme park restaurant since I was born.
I think that Universal needs to keep and they do an amazing job of this already. They just need to keep doing it. Is not only keep their finger on the pulse of what is popular in pop culture. What is the next American Horror Story? What is the next Stranger Things? And those IPs are what you put on a billboard that brings people to the event, which allows the event to grow. But Universal also does a really good job about keeping their finger on the pulse of the fans of the event, of the non-IPs and the originals. And every once in a while, they'll bring back a Jack or a shout out to an icon or something like that, or have like a retro house or some sort of a throwback to some previous house or scare zone or anything like that. And Universal does a really good job about keeping track of what's popular now, what's going to be popular tomorrow, and also what people love, what the fans love. And a lot of events don't do well with that. Like they know what we like, whether we know it or not, they know what we like. And as much as people complain about, like, oh, we're bringing Jack back or whatever, I think Universal understands that not everybody's seen Jack. Not everybody has seen the icons. Not everybody's been there for that. And for up and coming fans of the event that haven't gone a ton of years, that have only heard stories about the icons or the settings or the previous houses, every once in a while, if you throw them a bone, maybe you didn't get a chance to see Jack at 25, but you're gonna see him throughout the event this year. I miss the glory days of the icons, Tara Quintus and Storyteller and Usher and that kind of thing. And well, not Usher, but some of the other icons. But Universal's given me enough over the years to kind of feel like I was there in a way. I wasn't there at the specific year, but I did get a little bit of exposure to, the caretaker or the director or something like that. And for me, 25 was a big year because that was my anniversary where I finally got to see everything that I had missed, with the Icon Scare Zone and everything. So I'm not one of those people that complain when they announce that they're bringing back older stuff. Because that's part of the DNA of the event, the history of it. And people need to, whether or not that's something like you're super duper into, I'm happy that the newer fans get some sort of exposure to this. When you've been going to the event for years and years and years, that is like, that gives you that kind of throwback feeling. You're like, I was there and I saw Dead End, or I was there and I saw this house or that house or whatever. And I love these little mishmash kind of like shout out anniversary type houses because, it just makes you feel all glowy inside about being a part of the event for so long. And only fans that have been going for years and years really kind of get that. and new fans get exposed to that type of thing. I really think I think Universal does a good job about that balancing act of attracting new fans and maintaining their old fans as well. And they have a whole stable of this stuff. Eventually they might do another Interstellar Terror or something like that. They've got this whole backlog of things that in the future at Halloween Horror Nights 35, they can do another mashup of Interstellar Terror and Body Collectors, or Interstellar Terror and Saws and Steam. So having this huge backlog of stuff always gives Universal a lot of flexibility to have these tributes and have these shout outs to older houses. And they're geniuses in the way they implement them, And when they do a mashup house, it's usually greater than the sum of its parts. So I'm looking forward to that. I even if it's every 5 years, eventually I'll be in like a walker or somebody pushing me around a wheelchair. Halloween Horror Nights 40, 45, 50. 50 is obviously going to be huge. They're going to have 20 houses, but they're going to have all these ridiculous mashups. And it's going to be a really good time. You heard it here first. Mashup of Interstellar Terror and Saws and Steam. I guess it's my dream house. I don't know. That's what came to mind first.
This is a tough one for me because it's hard for me to believe that they can do better. Like every year that I go, I'm like, oh my God, that was awesome. This is going to be the best year ever. And then I go the next year, I'm like, oh my God, this was the best year ever. So it's still hard for me to believe that there is anything that they can do to improve because it's just so perfect as it is. But if I had to nitpick, I would say something that I really hope that Universal keeps in mind is that the experience is very dependent upon park capacity. In years past, there have been nights that I've gone where it was just way too crowded and almost unenjoyable because of those crowds. So I hope that they don't I hope they don't become super greedy and make it so that the crowds are so high that it's just not an enjoyable experience anymore. So I hope they keep that in mind. And as far as just keeping the caliber going, I think that they need to, for sure, keep amazing creative talent on their team. I know they had to get rid, that's a terrible way to put it, but I know that they had to let go a lot of very talented people over the pandemic. And I think some of them have been brought back in, but regardless, they need to make sure that they keep incredible talent on a Universal creative team, because without them, there would be no event. Without their incredible creativity and brains, it wouldn't be the same. So that needs to be a major investment for them, is to keep the brightest and the best talent on their team. And then also be on the lookout for IPs that they can bring in. Personally, my favorites are usually the original houses and zones. So IPs are secondary for me, but it's still a big draw, and it's still one of the best experiences for me in the houses is when I am walking through an IP and I do notice that it is very much like walking through the movie set. That is very impressive to me. So I think they need to also continue to hunt down those popular IPs and grab them before anybody else can. So again, they're killing it already. No pun intended, but they gotta keep it going. They can't rest on their laurels at all. Keep that talent in there and keep all of us crazy Uber HHN fans wanting more.
Two things straight away. The first one are the type of scares. I think Universal loves to do the whole boo hole, the boo hole where you jump out, you scare somebody, and you go back in. And then that's kind of it. Occasionally they'll throw in a bungee scare or, something creative. But usually it's pretty formulaic throughout the house, which is fine. It works. You don't have to mess with it too much. But I think, especially if you look at smaller haunts, local haunts around, maybe smaller permanent haunts around the country, they're getting very creative with their scares. And I don't know if it's because Universal is just, the event is so popular, a lot of those scares they just can't do because logistics, maybe it's too long to reset the scare. Maybe it's, safety for the characters. I know a lot of houses like to do things where they grab at your feet or something from low ground. And I think Universal is just a little too sort of afraid of the lawsuit, if you will. Like, it just takes one person to get scared, and then accidentally kick someone in the head, and then that scare is gone the next day. So I think they need to diversify it up a bit, so people like me who've been going for a long time can actually, get scared in house again. Which, I mean, they do try occasionally, but they don't do it often enough. And the second thing I would say would probably be the diversity in the casting and stuff like that. I know it's something they're aware of, and I know they've already made pretty great strides, especially like recently with things like Vanity Ball, where, they reached out to like the LGBT community and were able to bring those in and those elements. And I know in The Bride of Frankenstein Lives, it's like all the bride characters just aren't all, white Caucasian people. They've mixed it up a bit, and I appreciate that. And I think they need more houses and scare zones that incorporate things like that. Because, Horror Nights has a massive fan base. People of every walks of life and every skin tone, and everybody people love it. And I think people like to see themselves represented in the event in some way. And I don't think everyone has had that chance. I think Vanity Ball is the perfect example. The amount of people that still rave about Vanity Ball, not because it was particularly like an amazing scare zone or a scary scare zone, but because they were able to see people like themselves up on a stage and present in a light where it was like, look, you're part of our family too. We love you. And I think that's a great thing to have. And I think they should have more of it in the future.
So it seems from my guess that Universal don't need to do an awful lot to keep it at the top of its game. They've been doing it incrementally since the event began, adding little bits here and there. The food and drink at the event is a massive upgrade. The tribute store, there's so much that's been added to the event that make it even more than it was. The Lagoon show's become such a staple, even though it's only been at Horror Nights for 2 years. That Lagoon show, Marathon of Mayhem, has become something people expect. A huge show that isn't Bill and Ted fans, has become a huge part of the event. Now, could they include more houses, more scare zones, more food? Maybe, but would that improve the event, or would it stretch it a little too thin? Could they do another 2-park event? They could, but will they? Probably not, but honestly, I'd love to see it again. One of my biggest things they need to improve on, or at least try to look at improving, and I'm sure it's a lot of other people's as well, is crowd levels and dealing with those horrendous wait times for houses. Somehow they've got to manage those wait times, because we've seen houses with 180-minute wait, and people will wait it, but it gets to a point where that's at the detriment of people's experiences, and not everyone can afford a $150 express pass or a $300 RIP tour. So they could look at doing something with that. I don't know, but they could. They could look at pulsing the houses to ease off the much maligned conga lines. But again, I don't know how they could figure that out without impacting the capacity and the wait times for the houses. But that's not my job. Hopefully it's something they are constantly assessing, and we'll continue to monitor the situation, and I have every faith that they will do something eventually. But going back to my guests specifically now, and looking at their history with the event next. Now, having had 30 years of this event means that there have been over 200 haunted houses at Halloween Horror Nights to have walked through, and over 90 scare zones to have experienced during Halloween Horror Nights, which is crazy to think of. So the next question I ask my guests is, what was the best house you've had the opportunity to walk through? What is the best scare zone you've had the opportunity to experience? And for those years you didn't go, what is the one house you never got to experience that you wish you had?
These are actually pretty easy for me. So the house is definitely Psychoscary, Home for the Holidays. It's just and Krampus is there too. I love a Christmas themed horror thing. It's just so cool because when you combine holidays like that, it's amazing. So and there's a lot of good houses, don't get me wrong, along the way. It's hard to remember back, like way back to the very beginning. Like, I mean, obviously going back 23 years, my memory doesn't remember some of the houses walking through. So I have to, and there's not really much footage for them either out there anywhere to even look at it. So, but yeah, that was definitely one of my favorites for sure. And my favorite top of the line is that Psychoscary with Krampus, like right there. And then as far as the scare zone goes, I'm going to say Killer Clowns. Growing up, like watching that movie when I was 7, yeah, it always held a special place with me, like the movie itself. So being able to walk to that scare zone and interact with those clowns and have them the way they were, it was just so interesting and so much fun. Like I said, it's the most time I've ever spent in any scare zone was that one. It definitely shocks people when I say that. I'm trying to think to the couple of years before what was actually there. I guess what was like one of the first year was the Dungeon of Terror. That would be probably one I would love to have seen, just to see how much it really has changed since then, you know. And I guess People Under Stairs would be another one I'd want to see.
For favorite house, that is tough. And I can remember like throughout the years, like, oh, this one was my favorite until I saw this one. And now there's so many that it's hard to choose. And also because I personally like to form a distinction between the thing that I think is the best and the thing that is my favorite. So I kind of am averaging those two different things. So I'm going to name multiple houses right now on my way to naming my number one favorite. Okay. So my first favorite house ever was Nightmare on Elm Street Dreamwalkers in 2007. That was the house I think that made me fall in love with the event overall. It was my 3rd year going, but those first 2 years I was very hesitant and scared. And I was intrigued and impressed, but I wasn't in love yet. 2007 made me fall in love, and it was Nightmare on Elm Street that did it, because I knew the movies and I walked through the house and I was just blown away by how they were able to capture that and how they were able to translate it into an experience that like I had, you know. And then for a long time, that was the favorite. And now in the last few years, in 28 and 29 specifically, I think Poltergeist, objectively speaking, from a design standpoint, is the best haunted house I've ever walked through. It's not necessarily my favorite, because there are other houses that have checked my personal boxes of things that live in my heart. But I think from a design, objectively speaking, Poltergeist was a perfect haunted house. Then on the other side, there's a haunted house that I think is not perfect, but man, was it fun. And man, did it do everything I ever could have wanted in a haunted house and more. It was like walking through my own brain as a haunted house, and that was Slaughter Cinema. I walked through there and I was like, how did they know? How did they know what I would love exactly? It felt like they made it just for me, and that was incredible. And then in 29, they did a house that I think is the most evenly in between. I think a perfectly designed house with perfect scare setups and scare payoffs, if you timed it right, which more often than not I did, and even if you didn't time it right, you would still get to see it. And it burrowed its way into my heart as like, wow, this is also personally for me very much in line with things that I love, and that was Graveyard Games. I think Graveyard Games may be my favorite haunted house I've ever walked through. Just the setups and the scares were so unique and creepy and effective. The way each room would kind of like build up to a big moment, and each room would build to a bigger moment than the last. Like the escalation of scares and moments in that house leading up all the way to that last one, which was so simple. That final scare in that house of there's that statue of the main, you know, I don't remember the character's name, but that main like ghost that's terrorizing these kids. And you're looking up at her face, and like in the drapes of her dress down at her legs is a hole, and a hand comes out of it. It's the simplest thing in the world, but it knocked me down. And I said, that was all because of how this all built up. And now the last pin to fall is just hand shooting out with a sound effect. That house, I will never get over how much I loved that house. And then Scare Zone. I forgot we had to talk about Scare Zones. Also, I have to say, having worked the event, I feel personally out of fairness and objectivity, I have to exclude anything that I worked on or was in. So Insidious may have been my favorite house ever, but I don't know because I never got to see it objectively without knowing everything and everyone in it, you know. Vamp 55 I was in, and that Scare Zone I think I would have really loved that scare zone if I had seen it as a guest, but I think it's unfair of me to say that would be my favorite because I had a part in creating it and making it what ended up being a lot of people's favorite things. So I don't think I can say that. And Invasion, I feel I can more fairly say Invasion could have been one of my favorites because I did not perform in that zone. I really just got to watch it as an admirer every night, all night, watching what these characters were doing and just enjoying every second of it, and not having to be actively doing it myself. So Invasion, I think, actually is up there for me. I might also be biased just because I did spend every single night, every minute of every night in that scare zone that year. But when I think about which scare zones really do it for me, I love a scare zone with like a really big chaotic energy that you look at it from afar before you get there and you just see it and say, what is happening over there? That looks chaotic. Chaotic energy is really what makes the scare zone work for me. And I think one of the one that comes to mind immediately when I think of that is 25 Psychoscarapy Unleashed, I think is what it was. The New York scare zone in 25 with all the trick-or-treaters and the Shady Brook inmates that got out. I didn't get to spend very much time in that zone, but just everything about it it's everything that I love about Halloween Horror Nights and everything that I love about scare zones. It's fun. It's a party atmosphere. It's chaotic. There's lights. Like the atmosphere extends up to the rooftops of the zone. There is something happening everywhere you look, everywhere you go. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite zone. And Invasion, I'm going to give Invasion an honorable mention. And then house I never got to see that I would love to see would probably be either Maximum Carnage or the original Halloween from 24 or Dollhouse of the Damned, which was next door to Halloween. Those 24 houses, Halloween and Dollhouse, are two that everyone always talks about. And that was a year before I started working. And just, circumstances in my life made it, I only got to go one night that year. And so I think I only did maybe like 2 or 3 houses in 24. So I missed Halloween, missed Dollhouse. And by all accounts, those were 2 of the best houses that have ever been at the event. And Maximum Carnage, just because it's a Marvel Comics haunted house that was maybe not authorized. It's just cool that happened. And, nothing like that can ever happen again. And I would have liked to have been able to see it.
So, my favorite house of all time might be experiencing some shifts this season, but I need a whole more season to go through to figure it out. And I'll kind of talk about my favorite scare zone in a minute, and that should explain what's going on. But I'm not gonna give any details yet because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth later on this season in case it completely falls apart. Because I do judge these things on how they are the entire event run. They've got to be great the whole way through. But my favorite house of all time is Ghost Town: The Curse of Lightning Gulch. And that house just, man, it really was something entirely unique. Whenever they do something that's a little bit beyond spooky haunted house or zombies or anything like that, you have my attention. But setting it in a Western town with the ghosts of, this ghost town, and then doing it in the way that you did between the sets, the weather elements, and the story, I think was something really quite clever and special. I love that every ghost, you can find their dead body lying right next to them. And there's fun things to look out and see throughout that haunted house. But the major thing I think about when I go to Ghost Town is the town center. You've got the thunder crackling overhead. You've got the rain pouring down on you. And then there's a ghost literally lighting a cannon, at the end of the hallway that's shooting at you. So, and not only that, but you have some of the most iconic triggers of HHN in that house between, I said back off, and that's my gold. And all of those, they've gone down in HHN history. And that's one of the, 26 being Frequent Fear Pass first year for me. That was one that I was able to revisit over and over and over again. And it's held on even with strong competition from things like Universal Monsters during 29. My scare zone is going to 27, so the year after, and that is we're heading over to Central Park because that is where Trick or Treat was. And Trick or Treat is just, if you know me, I love traditional Halloween. Trick or Treat is a movie that I've always liked and have come to love just as it's become part of my Halloween rotation. And there's something about trick-or-treaters in Central Park with the pumpkin lights, that general orange overtone, going around knocking on doors, and their various interactions with people that work so well for me. And the house wasn't as good as the zone, but it was always going to be an uphill battle because you're not having those individualized experiences that you would in the scare zone. And so that's pretty clearly my favorite scare zone so far. It's really hard to imagine something ramping up from that. However, actually the Terra Cruentes zone in Central Park is actually really exceptional this year. And then yeah, it's tough because the original houses will sometimes get a callback. We've seen that happen during the 20 Years house. We saw it happen during Monsters and Mayhem. We've got Scary this year. But what doesn't often come back is the IPs. And I would just love a chance to go through A Cabin in the Woods. It's probably my favorite modern horror film. I love that it twists things on its head. And I like that it's basically two mazes in one. You've got the cabin inside element, which is very funny because I believe it was in the same soundstage or right next to The Evil Dead. So you've kind of played out that element 2 times that year. But going in, seeing the cabin, encountering the Buckners and everything like that, and then going into the sci-fi underground, that awesome elevator scene, and even the cubicles, which have Jack the Clown and the Caretaker in them, which I think is a fun little fact. But yeah, it's just, if you're going to bring back an IP, it's way out of its relevancy right now. However, it's a really good one, and I would love to see it.
Okay, so favorite house I've ever been to. It makes me so... there are so many. Okay, I'm going to be bad. I'm going to split it up. My favorite IP house I've ever been through, I think, was... Trick or Treat. Yes. And then my favorite original house I've ever been through, Slaughter Cinema. Hands down. Hands down. I want a feature film of every single movie that was in that house. Especially kids. They were hilarious. Favorite scare zone? See, I have a bias with the scare zones, though, because I worked a few of my favorites. So, was it my favorite because I worked it and had a really good time? Or was it my favorite because it was actually a really great concept and they did a great job executing it? I don't know. I really don't know. Okay. All right. Okay. I think it came from behind, right? A lot of people didn't really know what it was about. A lot of people had questions. They were like, this is silly. But after being in it for a night and being able to watch everyone do their thing, Vanity Ball, I think, is my favorite scare zone of my 3 to 4 years going. I do think that's going to change this year, I hope, but I did really enjoy it. I think a runner-up, though, also not everyone's favorite because they liked 55 better, but I didn't get to experience 55, so I don't know. But I did really like Vamp 85. I thought it was fun. And obviously Anarcade. I can't pick. It's like asking me to pick my favorite movie. There are so many. A house that I never got to go through, though, that I would have loved. Houses that I always hear people talk about are... You know what was also a really good house? Side tangent. Carnival Graveyard. Dead Waters was also a really good one. The Curse of Lightning Gulch. Oh, everyone always talks about it. And I'm like, I wish. And there's that one line that Tim Tracker always says, where's my gold? Like, I wish I could have experienced that house on my own, but unfortunately, it did not happen. Maybe one day.
Favorite house of all time was Nightingales at Halloween Horror Nights 21. That the World War I trenches house. That absolutely blew my mind. I love that house so much. I know they did the Gladiator sequel, which was okay, but the World War I trenches house was my all-time favorite house. It's just the look and scale of that house was just amazing. Favorite scare zone? Oh man, there's so many to pick from. I think from a connection in a falling in love with the event, I think Vamp 55 was probably my favorite scare zone. I could sit. I usually find like a bench or something to sit on just to watch a scare zone, and I like to people watch in scare zones to just kind of absorb, take a break. But Vamp 55, I think I spent so much time on one of those benches and just watching. And the characters and the interactions and the ambience and the music and everything. I'm pretty sure Sarah Smotherman put me in detention on one of those benches for like an entire weekend or something like that. So it was just really, really neat. And I met a lot of really cool people through that scare zone. And that was one of my favorites of all time. As far as a house that I never got to see, yeah, you hear so many. I think the SS Fritanic. I think that would be the house. Just with the dual run of that particular house, I think I would have really liked to see that. But every time I collect the maps, and I've got all the maps 1 through 30, and every once in a while, I'll put a pair of rubber gloves on and I'll break out the really old ones, and I'll look through and I'll be like, wow, if I could have been there to see this house or that house or whatever, or even I wish I could have seen some of the houses that I only got to go through like once. I still have amazing, and I know I mentioned it earlier with Interstellar Terror, but man, I really wish I could walk through that house again because it made such an impression on me. But yeah, I think those are going to be my favorite, my scare zone, and the house that never was for me.
Oh, right. So this actually was not a toughie for me. At least not yet. Maybe ask me again in 5 or 10 years and it might get tougher. But because I've only been going for 5 years, there was one house that really just sticks out in my mind and actually like makes me have emotions every time I think about it. It's probably not one that anybody would think of, honestly. I didn't hear a whole lot of chatter about this house, but for me, it was amazing. So in the year 27, HHN 27, The Fallen is actually my favorite house. I went through that house. I had my daughter Audrey with me, and I just remember that being such a beautifully scary house. I was able to halfway keep my eyes open for the most part. And there was this moment that it was just like kismet because I actually had my eyes open at the right time and it was amazing. So towards the end of the house, there's this big, dark black, a huge angel that comes flying down from the ceiling right at you. So the angel's kind of up in the shadows. You don't see that she's up there. And then she just swoops down. Of course, she's harnessed in like she's flying. So she just swoops down right into your face. And I had my eyes open. It was towards the end of the night. So we weren't really getting shoved through super fast like you are towards the beginning of the night. So we were able to actually kind of be there for that moment. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, that was incredible. That was so, it scared me. I did duck a little bit and scream, but then I was like, that was beautiful. I just couldn't even believe that they took the time and the money to invest in that one scare aspect, not just from the harness aspect of it, but like the beauty of the costuming and the huge wings this character had on. It was just like, it blew my mind. And that has never left that experience has never left my mind or my body. So anytime anybody asks me about any of my favorite experiences at Halloween Horror Nights, that's definitely one of them. So I would have to say so far that is my favorite house because none of the other houses have made me have that reaction like that one did. And then as far as scare zones go, I'm going to have to go back to HHN 25. And I don't know if this is because, again, that was one of my first experiences with HHN, or if, it's because I have a little bit of a love for Disney too. I don't know. But Scary Tales Scream Punk, I think, is going to have to be my favorite scare zone so far. Seeing Snow White walk around with that apple and that bloody mouth, and that was super cool. So having the mouse and the muggle, so that was year 25. So Robin and I were there together. And it was just kind of perfect that we were there for this quote unquote Disney-ish scare zone experience. And it was super cool. We spent a lot of time in that scare zone, and the costumes were absolutely incredible. The scare actors did an amazing job interacting with all of the guests, including us. It was very cool. I wish they would do something like that again, because it was awesome. And then I had to go back through all of the different years, of course, to see what was offered for a house that I wish that I could have experienced. And honestly, after our interview, after our Rush of Fear interview, which we sat down with Julie Zimmerman, who is the mother of Halloween Horror Nights. Recently, we interviewed her and kind of got her perspective on those first few years of HHN, when that was really her creation, her baby. She had the best memories of all of that than anybody else, obviously, because social media and digital cameras and things like that weren't a thing back then. So hearing her talk about Dungeon of Terror just like ignited me. I was like, oh my God, I so wish I could have been there for that, especially that first year, because they didn't have all of the restrictions that we have now, governmental restrictions and company restrictions as far as safety codes and things like that. It was really just like a free-for-all for them back then. They got away with a lot of stuff that they couldn't do now. And so hearing her talk about Dungeon of Terror and the things that they were able to get away with, she said the characters didn't really touch. That was not a thing, but she described this moment. Of course, Dungeon of Terror was in the Jaws queue. And she described this moment where the people were walking over like a bridge type deal where there's water next to them. And they actually had a scare actor in the water, like in a dive suit under the water, that would come up out of the water like a water monster and scare people literally from the water. I was like, what? That would literally make me crap my pants if that happened. So, they just can't do stuff like that anymore. So being able to be a part of that experience with, no holds barred would be amazing. So I'd have to say Dungeons of Terror year one.
First of all, I want to tell you that you're a terrible person for asking fans this question. Okay? This has kept me up at night. I have changed this answer so many times. But for my favorite house, it comes down to two, and one of them, honorable mention, is 25 Years of Monsters of Mayhem. But I was like, I'm sure someone else is going to say that. So my other one is actually The Forsaken from HHN 21, which that house, it was something special. It was beautiful. It was unique. It had a lot of good effects that they had never done before. It was a great house for they were trying new things in that house that they hadn't done before. It was the first house with the tilted walkway. That was the first time they did that. There was a section where there was just rain was coming down, water spraying on you, and then they had wind blasting at you because it was supposed to be a hurricane outside. And it's one of the few houses where the facade was actually in the middle of the house instead of the front of the house. So that was fun. But yeah, The Forsaken, I'm going to say that's my favorite house. Monsters and Mayhem is probably my favorite house. But like I said, I'm sure it's probably one of the most popular answers out there. Everyone's like, oh, I love that house. Oh, because it had everything in it. So people love it. But I like The Forsaken because I think it was Universal trying something new, trying to branch out, do something different. And it doesn't always work. But in this particular case, I think it worked very well. And the fact that it came back in 25 years, I think, says something. Scare zones. Okay, this was another hard one as well. I'm going to say the Schoolhouse from 2008. Yes, it was a ripoff of, Trick or Treat. But you know what? They didn't have the rights to Trick or Treat, so they did their own thing with it. I love that scare zone. I love the little schoolhouse they built with the little Weatherman with like the headless horseman on it, I think it was, and the school bell ringing. And it was also the first time they put the jack-o'-lanterns in the trees in Central Park, which I think has become sort of something. It's not a staple every year, but it's something people always talk about, and they get so excited when it comes back. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I love that. I love that. Plus, you could walk through the schoolhouse. It was like a tiny little mini haunted house. There was usually like, only 2 characters in there, but you could still get scared. And then my favorite thing about the scare zone, apart from the pumpkins and the trees, was the cast changes, because they had a school bus that was just parked in the street, and all the kids would line up and they'd go onto the school bus and the lights would turn off, and then they'd switch out the cast and the new ones would come onto the school bus, and then there'd be like silence, and then you'd hear like knocking noises. They'd all be knocking on the windows, and you'd be like, what the heck is that? And then the lights would come on the bus and they'd all be in the windows looking at you, and then they would come out, line up, like they're going to school, and the schoolmaster would be like, he would give his little speech and be like, go, kill, and then they'd scatter and scare everybody. And I love that. And this year, there's actually like a little nod to it in one of the windows. They put like a picture of like the schoolhouse, and it says like, welcome to Carrie in Autumn or something like that. But yeah, and when I said it was a ripoff of Trick or Treat, I don't mean some of the costumes looked like they were from Trick or Treat, but if you look at the actual like Scare Zone logo on the website, it's the kids from Trick or Treat, just with like a color filter on. It's like they saw the movie and were like, "Ooh, what a good aesthetic! Let's do that," which I'm fine with. I'm gonna say, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There was a Travel Channel special from, I think it was from 2002, and it had the caretaker, and he was like walking through the event. I think it was called Art of the Scare, and it's on. I think you can find it on YouTube still. I, as a kid who went in 2001 and then was too scared to go until 2005, I loved that Travel Channel. I actually owned it on DVD behind me. And in that, I remember watching it being like, they have like a walkthrough of the Scream House. I think it was the first Scream House because it was 2002. I wish I could do that house. Like the original caretaker's house. Like, I know, with today's mindset, it's probably one of like, it's probably like a smaller house, right? I understand that. But having grown up watching that special almost on a yearly basis, I really wish I can go back and see that year in particular, but that house in particular, because I did the follow-up in, was it 2006? It was like Resurrection, I think it was called, Scream House Resurrection. So I did that. So I kind of got a taste of it. But yeah, I kind of wish he's the one icon I never really truly got to experience. So I kind of wish I can go back and have a little bit of that.
We're just about at the end of another UUOP podcast documentary, and having delved into Halloween Horror Nights, I hope it's given you something to think about and helps you appreciate the event even more. And if you haven't been, maybe this series has changed your mind. Maybe you might take the step to visit next time. But as those of you who have visited, you know what Halloween Horror Nights is all about and how much it means to you. It means so much to so many people. For me, it means I'm with my podcast family in my favourite place in the world, getting to walk through some of the most elaborate themed haunt walkthroughs built anywhere. Just being able to forget about daily life and immerse yourself in one of the greatest events in the world. So the last thing I asked my guests to do was tell me what Halloween Horror Nights means to them.
Everything. I mean, last year, like when it didn't happen, the full event, with everything going on in the world and all the different things, and everybody just like being in panic mode, and everybody, it was devastating because not seeing all the people that we normally see and hang out with. And that's why I've always said it means more than just like going to an event or a Halloween thing. It's just being able to see my friends, my family, and people that I don't see but once a year sometimes. And I guess it means family and just everything. And it means Halloween to me. I know like when Halloween Horror Night starts, that's when Halloween starts. That's when the season actually begins.
That's a complicated question. That has changed throughout the years. From my like high school years when I would go 2 nights, I would usually go, my birthday's at the end of September. So the event used to start right around my birthday every year. So I would go right at the beginning for my birthday. And then I would go again later in the season whenever like school would have a Friday night or a Friday off. So I would go on the Thursday just because the tickets were cheaper. So it used to be just fun. It used to be a place where like I would just go with, a handful of my friends. We would have a great time. We would get scared. And I would get to see a bunch of really cool stuff in these sets and stuff. And now after having had a closer, I've been inside the event, I've worked as part of it. And so many of like my most valuable relationships and friendships now in my life have come from Halloween Horror Nights. My castmates in my, various locations where I have been, and even outside of that, just other people in the Halloween Horror Nights community. I mean, I'm in the band that I'm in now because of connections made through the Horror Nights community. And at this stage of my life, like that, this band I'm in is like the most important thing to me that I've ever been a part of. It's like the most passionate thing I've ever worked on, or the thing I've ever worked on that I feel most passionately about. And like, I, am going to do everything I can to make this my entire life. And Halloween Horror Nights in an indirect way is the reason why I'm doing this. It's how I was introduced to my bandmates. All my bandmates pretty much. So it's hard to boil it down, but yeah, Halloween Horror Nights to me means everything. I mean, everything that I value outside of like, family and like, really fundamental things like that. All of the family I've made in my, mid to late 20s, and now I'm 30, has kind of come from Halloween Horror Nights. And yeah, it's kind of incredible, like how this event can touch so many lives in so many different ways.
Halloween Horror Nights means to me my favorite time of year, to be perfectly honest. It is the one time a year where all these wonderful people that I've met, whether they're working the event, attending the event, or just discussing the event online because they can't make it, we kind of all come together and put aside the bullshit of the last year and just unite underneath something that makes us happy. And at the end of the day, it's fun to do lists, it's fun to do rankings, it's fun to do all of that. But the fact that we can all unite underneath the umbrella of Halloween Horror Nights as a whole, and I might see people that I haven't seen in 2 years, 3 years, or, it's been a year since I've had a chance to see them. It's the feeling of community for me more than anything. And then pulling that together along with getting an opportunity to walk through some incredible haunted houses that are limited time only, that's a huge piece of it.
Well, for me, it's like, I think for me, there's like different parts of it. So like on the guest / fan side, it's a sense of community and like a little family and just a bunch of people who enjoy the same thing that, love to go to an event together and not just enjoy the event as a normal person would who just goes to go, but like, we'll walk around and be like, oh, like this set piece means this, or, hey, did you see the lighting in that one room of that one house? Or, oh, a scare actor down that way said this crazy thing to me. Let's go back around and see what else they say. Like, it's people who enjoy doing that. And, we don't think it's, well, I mean, other people would probably think it's weird, but like, we don't think it's weird because it's just what we do every day. But on like the other side of it, it's so interesting to see like what creative comes up with and just how elaborate they do it. They don't mess around. Like they're here to give us the best experience possible. And they're like, let's go all out, Let's fill an entire street full of, I don't know, trying to think of like New York. I mean, zombies. Zombies is usually what New York is full of within past years. But it's just such a creative event. And I love that you know, the creative team really gets to put their heart and soul into it. And, you know, when Killer Clowns was brought in, like, that was Mike Aiello's like big, that was his like number one. He was like, I have been trying for so long to get this in, and it's here. And I love that they're able to do that. And then obviously, like, we get to see their creations. I don't know. So it's just, it's a sense of community, a sense of family, and then also just a sense of creative and imagination, which I think is fun. Like, happy times.
To me, Halloween Horror Nights has a huge social component to it. It is a community. It is an amazing place that brings people together. And I look at it like a spooky family reunion, because there are a lot of my friends that I met through Horror Nights, and sometimes I only see them at Horror Nights. And we get an opportunity to all hang out as friends, because it's something that unites us all. We all love the event. And there isn't a lot of that in the world these days. You know, something that brings us all together. And that's what I look forward to. Like, I know the houses and scare zones and merch and food options and shows are going to be great. But to me, what means more is I have an opportunity to go out and hang out with my friends and see them and talk about the event leading up to it, hang out with them at the event, connect with them after the event. And that's really what Halloween Horror Nights means to me. Is it's just a place where I can be part of a very positive community, at least the people that we hang out with, and that's my favorite part. Other than the event itself, it's the positivity and the inclusiveness of the community.
To me, Halloween Horror Nights means so many different things. It has brought so many awesome, amazing people into my life and continues to every year. It has brought my family together, because this has become one of the things that my oldest daughter, who is actually my stepdaughter, and I look forward to every year. And it's been an amazing bonding experience for us through times that weren't so great in her teenage years. And now my youngest daughter is going and loving it. So I can see that relationship growing throughout, you know, the rest of my life as well. My wife now loves it. So it's just an awesome experience for my family, who normally has a rough time going together, all four of us, to theme park activities. But this is something that we all love together. And then just the friendships that have formed because of Halloween Horror Nights and a shared passion for the event is just, it's immeasurable. It's amazing, the people that I've met through this event and attending this event, and the fun that we have together and the memories that we make. It just means so much to me. I will always go to this event. I will always be drawn to people who love the spooky and who love haunts. And this is the best one out there. So it will always be a part of my life, one that I cherish and always will.
It's going to be a very popular answer, I know, but HHN to me can be summed up in one word, and that's just family. It's essentially just one massive family reunion every year that just also happens to be like the biggest Halloween party ever. So there's just people having drinks in their Blinky cups, eating fun food, twisted taters, pizza fries, everywhere you go. You know, you're meeting up with people and you're just casually running into people that you know and maybe haven't seen in a year, or this year, like 2 years, you haven't seen them. And it's just people having, you know, a good time. The music is blasting. People are screaming and laughing. You're people watching. It's just all fun. And it's just always a good night when you're spending it at Halloween Horror Nights. Every time.
So there you go. That's going to wrap up our look at Halloween Horror Nights and why it is such a big deal for so many people. We've dug deep into my guests' history with the event and their opinions on the event itself. Feel free to get in touch with us and let us know the answer to all these questions for you. But for now, I want to say a huge thank you to my guests, Harry, Kenneth, Johnny, Maddie, Hunter, Michelle and Sean, for taking the time to come and talk to me. Because you might have heard them for a little bit in these last 2 episodes, I've talked to them a lot putting these episodes together, and it's been awesome connecting to the Halloween Horror Nights community when, let's be honest, this year I can't be there. But I will encourage you all to go and check the guys out. So you can find Harry over at Freaks of HHN, find Johnny at HauntScene.com, find Hunter at the Catacombs of Halloween Horror Nights, you can find Sean at HNNightmares, and of course, Kenneth, Maddie and Michelle over our very own Rush of Fear podcast. I also want to say a huge thank you to Jeff over at Burnt Ends for providing the background music you've heard during both of these episodes. Go and check his stuff out. It is awesome. He also provided the intro and outro music for our Rush of Fear podcast. But for now, I'm going to wrap this show up, as I did the last one, with a quote from Marathon of Mayhem and Rush of Fear by letting you know that this podcast has come to an end. Now get out.
Guess that wraps things up for another Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. You guys did all right. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest, keyword UUO Podcast. Listen and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or anywhere podcasts are found. You can find our blog at uuopodcast.com. Send us your spews, which Lou gets your poo recordings, questions, or comments to podcast@uuopodcast.com. Check out our friends, the Theme Park Duo, and our awesome sponsors, Mouse and Muggle Travel Company. So, until next time, don't give up your day job. Say cheese. See you later.